Congratulations, you're a new camera, and to maximize your time, we're gonna focus on these 4 sections while the rest is either optional or can stay as is. First, make sure you have unpacked your camera, the battery is in, you've done your basic setup with the language, time, etc. And let's start with the dials that you find on top of the camera. Since we are talking photo settings, turn this bottom dial to the photo icon. And if you want to learn video settings, check the link in the description as I made a video about it too. The second dial should be on either P, A, S or M. However, I usually recommend setting it to A, which is aperture priority, meaning you can control the ISO as well as aperture, but let the camera to choose the most suitable shutter speed. The new cameras are really smart and they will do an amazing job. And if you feel like the photo is too bright or too dark, I'll explain how to compensate for that really easy. The 1, 2, and 3 is super useful as well. Those are your saved camera settings, and I'm going to show you how to set those up at the end of the video because first we need to set everything up. Oh, and one last thing, please don't shoot full auto. Learn the basics of the shutter speed, the ISO, and the aperture, and you'll be grateful to yourself of how much better your photos get. Okay, so let's set that wheel on A and jump into the menu system. And don't worry, this new menu system with 55 pages seems overwhelming, but honestly, most of it you don't even need to touch. And in about 15 minutes from now on, you will not only have your Sony A6700 ready to take amazing photos, you will know all the ins and outs. So the first section is shooting, page 4 out of 55. So to open a menu, you have to click the menu button on the camera and then head down to the shooting, and under image quality and recording, we have to talk about the file format, which is RAW and JPEG. I know as a beginner, you will be very inclined to shoot JPEGs, and that's all fine. However, if you want to take it to the next level, I really recommend shooting also RAWs and JPEGs on the side. And if we are here regarding the JPEG switch, I recommend JPEG because these two formats are great for compression and all that, but not every device can take them. So stick with the JPEGs. Regarding the RAW file type, I always recommend lossless compression because the compressed is not as good as a quality as lossless. And regarding the JPEG quality, you know, what I do is I set extra fine here. However, the JPEG image quality, I set it to small because I usually use the JPEGs only for social media and I want them really, really small because I also have the RAW files. Aspect ratio 3:2 because that is the size of the sensor. If you're gonna select something like 1:1 or 16:9, that basically means that you are just cropping in. I recommend 3:2 because that gives you the full image, and then if you need to crop it, just crop it on Instagram or wherever you're gonna use the image. File format doesn't matter because it's for a video. Movie settings the same. Long exposure, noise reduction, I usually leave it on. It will just reduce a bit of noise when you have a longer exposure. And high ISO noise reduction, I leave it to normal. These new cameras are pretty smart. They'll do a pretty good job. And as for beginner, that's totally fine for you. Color space, sRGB, and the lens compensation I set to auto, and distortion compensation should also be auto. All right, next up, media. So here, format is only if you want to format your SD card, so be careful. I usually recommend switching to the full format because it formats the SD card a little bit better in my opinion. The rest of the things, that's not important at this point. File, here is a very interesting thing. File folder system. The file numbers, I usually make it to series because I want them to continue instead of resetting every time. Set file name. Here I usually set whatever the camera name is because I shoot with several cameras and then I want to know which camera I'm using. And the folder name, very useful tip, use date form because if you use standard form, all the images are going to go in one folder. However, if you use date form, then for each date you will have a folder. So if you're on a trip and you have several days that you're shooting, each of those photos are going to be in those days and so on. It's just going to make your life a lot easier. Copyright info, I do recommend you to set the photographer and the copyright, just, you know, in case you become famous and everyone wants to use your photos. Just a nice thing to have. Shooting mode, we will return to this one at the very end of the video because this is where you save those presets if you need. Drive mode, very important. there are a couple of options in the drive mode. For you as a beginner, most likely you're going to just use 3, which is single shooting, meaning when you click the button once, it takes one photo. Continuous shooting is when you hold it down, the camera keeps taking photos, and you have a couple of options from low continuous shooting all the way to high plus. And the last one is a self timer. And very important, some of these settings should be your quick settings. So for example, here under FN, when you click the FN, you already see that the drive mode is there, because this is something that you usually change quite often. And as you can see, there are a couple of other things that use here very often. Now I hit back menu. Bracket settings and interval shooting function, perhaps as a beginner you're not going to use, so I'm not going to delve into those. Let's go to the next section, shutter/silent. Very important. So basically, the camera has 2 types of shutter. It has mechanical or electronic shutter. If you are in some setting like a church ceremony or any other place where you do not want the camera to make any noise when taking photos, you want to switch the silent mode on. However, generally people do not recommend using the electronic shutter because there might be things like light flickers. So generally shoot with a mechanical shutter if you can. E-front curtain shutter, I typically leave it on. However, if you have it on off, there's going to be a little bit of lag because the shutter physically has to open, expose the image and then close. Release without the lens and release without the card is just not important at this point. And anti-flicker settings, this is what you can play around. I don't have any recommendation, but you can do if you see some flickering in your images. Image stabilization. Steady shot, definitely set it to on because the A6700 has an IBIS or in-body image stabilization, so you definitely want to have that on. And steady shot adjustment auto. If you have some manual lenses, you can switch this to manual and then you will be able to choose the focal length. The zoom, I ignore completely. I do not use that function. And regarding the shooting display, the last thing, grid line display, I really recommend you to set it on, and grid line type, the rule of thirds, basically means that you have those lines on the screen to help you with the composition. All right, the next section is exposure and color, and here are a couple of items that we need to take a look at, but definitely not as much as in the previous one. So first of all, exposure, bulb timer, ignore for now. ISO, very, very important. I do expect that you know what ISO is, but I'm just want to show you that you shouldn't go here in the menu and try to change the ISO because there are a lot more convenient ways to do it. First of all, you can just hit right side of the wheel and you will open the ISO menu here, or alternatively you can actually just spin it. It changes the ISO, and obviously you want to keep your ISO as low as possible if you have enough light. ISO range limit I have set to the maximum, and if you ever want to use the auto ISO, which is not a bad thing, I personally just use the auto ISO and I set it to fast, meaning it will increase the ISO more to prioritize a faster shutter speed. Next up, exposure compensation. This is again something that I was telling you at the beginning of the video, extremely important. And before I tell you all about it, let's jump to the metering, because this is also important. Metering mode is what you tell the camera how to assess the image. And usually, for most cases, multi is the one you want to go with because it takes into consideration the whole picture, especially because you also have a face priority in multi-metering mode. So meaning if there is a face, it recognizes, it will always prioritize the proper exposure for the face. I told you these cameras are really, really smart. However, there are other ways of metering. I do not particularly recommend them because the multi for beginners is definitely one way to go. However, if for example you're taking a picture of a lens that is really dark and everything else bright, then the camera thinks, oh, all those bright areas, I need to reduce the brightness, and then the lens simply, disappears. So what you want to do is you want to compensate that with exposure compensation. And again, you do not have to come in here to control that because you can set one of these wheels to be your exposure compensation meter. All right, so metering we covered. Flash, I don't use personally flash, and I'm not going to touch upon that. White balance, for most parts, I would say you can go with auto white balance, and I think the camera is going to do a pretty good job. Again, if you're shooting raw images, it doesn't really matter because you can change the everything you have regarding the image, including the white balance. But if you find yourself in like really sunny day or cloudy day or in shade, then you can change that up if that makes you more comfortable with, especially with shooting with JPEGs. Priority set in auto white balance, not gonna touch that, and shutter, I'll be lucky, you also don't need that for now. Dynamic range optimizer is basically that the camera tries to edit the photo, reduce the highlights and brighten the shadows for you. Again, since I mostly shoot in RAWs, I do not want the camera to do anything. I want to do all my editing. So you can go ahead and try and experiment around it. I personally leave it to off. When it comes to creative looks, picture profiles and all these soft skin effects, they only apply to JPEGs. Again, another extremely important thing why you should shoot also RAWs is because you have full control on to edit them later. However, sometimes I do activate a creative look, and it gives certain, let me see, so it gives certain looks on how you want your image to look, sepia, black and white, and so on. And then of course you can also change the looks here, and then you can also change all the highlight, shadows, and all the other things if you wish. So lastly, zebra display. I think this is mostly for videos, and as a beginner, I don't think you should be getting into the zebra displays. So I'm gonna skip that as well. And that actually concludes this section, and we're ready to go on to the next one. So the next one is the autofocus, or manual focus, if you will. Here are a couple of things. Focus mode. There are a couple of focus modes, and again, this should be your quick menu. So basically, single shot autofocus is when you are focusing, it just focuses once and then until you take the picture. I personally, most of the times, use continuous autofocus, and what that means is that the camera continuously focuses on something. Next one is what I would change is autofocus tracking sensitivity. Really depends on the situation. Standard is a perfect way to go about it as well. Autofocus illuminator, just that little light in the front, lights up at night if it is on auto. You can switch it off as well. And then the last one, autofocus with shutter. I personally have switched it off, and I know a lot of people will be like, what the hell? But that's called back button focus. Basically what that means is that I'm actually focusing with another button, and the shutter button is just for me to take the photos. And I found it so useful because sometimes I want to focus, even with continuous autofocus. I want to reframe the photo and then I want to take the photo, or I want to take several photos without refocusing. So to do that, you need to set autofocus with shutter off, and then we need to do a custom button, which I'll show you at the very end of the video. Going on, focus area. Again, another quick item menu, focus area. Most of the times I'm shooting at wide. It's just how much you tell the camera to focus on. So as you can see, there are different wide, zone, for example, where you can tell the camera to focus on specific zone, or you want center if you want to focus on something very, very specific, or other options. I actually made, again, a whole video just about the focus areas and so on. Link in the description. Again, for most cases, wide will be totally fine and you should be good to go. The next thing, subject recognition, really important because, again, camera is smart. It does recognize certain subjects. So subject recognition in autofocus should be on, and for example, that's when you are focusing, you will be seeing the little square, for example, for the eye. So there are a couple of recognition targets like a human, animal, bird, insect, car, train, airplane, and so on. I have it limited to 3, and that you can do here. I have human and / animal, bird. The rest I have disabled because I'm not a fan of photographing airplanes. And how you change that, again, you don't have to come in here with in the menu. You can have it under the FN, which is the function button, or I have set it with this middle button. When I click the middle button, it just circles through either through animal, bird, or a human. There are a couple of other things that you can do here, like you know, right or left eye selection to focus on, or remembering the faces, registering them, and so on. Nothing much for us to go in here. And then the focus assist, if you are shooting with manual lenses or you like manual focus, I'm not going to dwell into this too much, but auto magnifier and manual focus should be on. That just simply, I'll show you how it works. So if I were to focus here, and as soon as I start focusing with the focus ring, you can see that the magnifier comes on, and it's just a little bit easier to focus exactly where I want. Besides that, there's also peaking display. Again, set it to on. In my case, peaking level middle and color red. There's bunch of colors, again, preference, but that basically is when you are focusing, then it will show you where exactly are you focusing. So last section, I'm going to be skipping the playback and also the network. Just play around. It's self-explanatory. There's nothing too complex. It's just you setting up Wi-Fi's and all the other things to be able for you to use it with the mobile app and so on. I'm going to skip that to save your time in this video, but there are a couple of things in the last item, which is the setup. And here, obviously, if you are setting up your area and date and all that stuff, there is one thing that probably I would pay attention to, which is the monitor brightness. If it is important for you, definitely play around with that. Display quality high, as well as flipping the monitor in the way you want. Sorry for jumping around, but remember, select either the finder or monitor. I personally never use electronic viewfinder. I do not like to put the camera close to my eye. I like to see through the screen. So instead of auto, I actually select monitor manual. So then when I cover my camera's viewfinder, it will not switch to the viewfinder. All of these things here, I think, are very much, again, personal preferences. Go check them out, play around. Nothing super critical for you to change regarding the quality. However, there is one thing that I think is very important for you, and that is those custom buttons. So basically that you will find under Operation Customize. And as you can see here, there's, for example, the thing that I mentioned, FN menu settings. So basically here under the photo, you can choose what kind of settings you want. So the second thing I'm going to show you is how to get your back button focus. So as I mentioned, I don't want the shutter to be my focus. I want this AF on button to be my focus. So I'm just going to go to custom key dial set, and I'm going to find that button, which is actually number 2. And as you can see, I already have selected. So it hides under AF MF, under AF MF, and then you have AF on. As long as you're going to hold that button down, the camera is going to be focusing. And when you're ready to take a photo, just hit that shutter button and you will be good. Remember, all of the other custom buttons here on the side, the C4, C1, C2 and others, you can change and do play around and find what works best for you. I told you the ISO, for example, is here on the right side, and on these top buttons as well. I have autofocus, manual focus, selector toggle, because sometimes I like to do that. If the lens supports a custom button, you can program it here as well. And here are the 3 wheels that I was mentioning. So for me, the wheel number 1 in front is the one that changes the aperture. It's this one, and the exposure compensation for me is on the other wheel, so here. And that just helps me very, very quickly make the brightness of the image exactly as I want. And the third wheel is ISO. Again, you can hit the right side of the wheel or you can just spin it around. And then lastly, when you have saved all of these settings, when you have set your camera exactly as you want, I highly recommend you to save those under that 1, 2, and 3. And how you do that is basically you go into shooting mode. So page 8 out of 55, and you go to camera set memory. And here the camera will save everything that you have right now, and you can choose where you want it. And one last thing, there is this main screen where you actually can, you know, oversee everything as an overview, very handful as well. And then you also have my menu where you can put your favorite items, very straightforward. I have only one on this camera, which is format that I use very, very often. And guys, if you want to shoot videos, there is a video down in the description on how to set your A6700 for that. It was a long video. I tried my best to be as quick as possible. I hope it was useful. Write a comment down below what else you want to learn about this camera or something else. I'll catch you all in the next one. And of course, don't forget to keep on creating.